Okay, ladies and gentlemen, I think we'll get started here. This is it's a great it's a it's a great opportunity for us today at CSIS to be able to host Chatib Basri, who's the chairman of the BKPM, which is an Indonesian acronym, as most of you know, for the Investment Coordinating Board. Dr. Basri is eminently qualified for this position. He is a leader is also vice chairman of the National Economic Committee of the President of the Republic of Indonesia, a senior lecturer at the Department of Economics at the University of Indonesia, and he's got a long history in economic and business management. So, like his predecessor, Gita Wirawan, we have another incredibly talented Indonesian leader at BKPM. And the results are pretty good. I think he'll probably talk about those. But those of us who track Indonesia, have to be impressed with the numbers that you and the President and Gita and the economic team in Indonesia have delivered, Dr. Chatib. I'd also like to, before we start, just thank the Derwin Pereira. He has endowed an initiative here at CSIS that will allow us to bring experts like Dr. Chatib here to talk about Indonesia, the U.S.-Indonesia relationship, and developments across the Indonesian landscape, from trade and investment to political security issues, to people-to-people ties. So we really appreciate that support. I'd also like to recognize several former U.S. ambassadors to Indonesia. Paul Wolfowitz here, Cameron Hume in the back, former U.S. ambassador to Singapore, Tim Chorba, and if I'm missing others, I hope I haven't, but it's quite a crowd on a Friday, and I think that's testament to a couple things. First, your leadership, the U.S.-Indonesia relationship, and the interest in among companies and policymakers about trying to find alignment, even more alignment between the United States and Indonesia. So please join me in welcoming our speaker today, Dr. Chatib Basri.
Thank you very much, Ernie. A very good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. It is a great pleasure to be here at the CSIS at this prestigious event. Thanks for having me, Ernie. This afternoon, I would like to speak about the things that I actually prepared as sort of like a PowerPoint presentation, but since I cannot present it, but I'll do it, off the cuff and explain to you later on. What I call the Indonesia Rising's the next steps for Asia aspiring powerhouse. There are three things that I would like to share with you. The first one is about the potential. The second one is about some of the problem and challenges they are facing on. And the last part is how do we mitigate these issues. So I'm not going to tell about only the good story about Indonesia. I better tell you the truth about what's really going on the ground. But let me look back on 1998. I was at the Australian National University in 1998 when we had a discussion about Indonesia at that time. I still remember most of the Indonesians. I forgot whether Don Emerson was also there, but many Indonesians all over the world came to ANU, to Australian National University. We're discussing about what will be the future of Indonesia at that time. And none of us believed that this country will survive, because we believe that things that will problem to become, to appear to Indonesia is probably the potential of balkanization. We were talking about if we had this direct presidential election, there will be a bloodshed because Indonesians are not ready for that. If you're talking about this economic growth, the prospect of the economy is really bleak, was really bleak at the time. So nobody believed that, this country will survive. And then 10 years after that, I was in Brookings for the 10 years, Asia 10 years after the crisis. And I was complaining about the situation in Indonesia in 2007 because the economy will only grow by about 3 to 4%, unemployment still a problem. And there was one interesting comment come from the audience. They said that you cannot compare Indonesia with Malaysia, Korea, and Thailand because none of them changed from the authoritarian regime into democracy in one night. And none of them embraced the decentralization from centralization in one night. So the close comparator for us, it's probably Philippines. And if you look at our experience with comparison, our performance with Philippines, somehow I would say that in terms of macro and so also the political consolidation, Indonesia relatively well and sort of like making a progress. Still a lot of problems. Now let me talk about this, the current situation. There is a changing of the new pattern of the global growth. I was in the fund meeting a couple months ago. The things that we discuss is we are entering about the new pattern of we call the rising Asia, because the slowdown of the euro debt problem and also the slowdown of the U.S. economy, somehow the contribution of the Asia will become very important. I'm not a big fan of this decoupling because I do believe that still the final buyers still come from the advanced countries. So I'm not a big fan of it, but we see the sort of like the importance role of Asia. And if you're talking about Asia, there are three major countries now. It's really become the major poles of growth. The first one is what I call the Greater India, which is India and South Asia. That's really pulling the growth. But India is facing a problem now. The economic growth is slowing down. Yeah, economic is slowing down. If I'm not mistaken, in the second quarter, they grew by about 5.3%. Used to grow by about 7 to 8%. The second one, what we call the East Asia, or some people claim it as a Greater China. Of course, this is not something that politically correct, but but China is also slowing down now. They grew by 7.5%. Used to grow by about 9 to 10%. And the last but not least, there is one indispensable country, but nobody pay attention on this. What I call a Greater Indonesia, which is ASEAN. Why I call ASEAN as a Greater Indonesia? Because if you're talking about size, 48% of the ASEAN economies is actually the size of the Indonesian economy. And if you're talking about in terms of population, 42% of the ASEAN population is basically Indonesian population. So in terms of market size, this is really big. So those three are sort of like changing pattern of the global growth and also sort of like slowing down in other countries really put Indonesia into the radar screen. And if you look at our economic experience, performance, in the second quarter, while other countries are facing a sort of like slowing down, the economy continued to be robust, even grow by about 6.4%, higher than the first quarter. So this is the only country, I should say, among the Southeast Asian country, which is having this, experiencing the higher economic growth. So this is really put Indonesia into the radar screen. I don't know this is fortunate or unfortunate. Other countries, the other parts of the world are facing this slowing down. If you look at the rising wages in China, the rigidity in the labor market, become a push factor to push investor to put the production base out of China, start to relocate some of these, companies. I could mention some of the companies like, it's never happened before, like the footwear, Reebok, New Balance, started to sort of like to open up again their factory in Indonesia. Also the textile company. We always got a problem with these labor issues before. But now, relocation from China start to happen. And the Japanese also got a problem because the currency appreciation of the yen-daka, making this production costs become very expensive. So there are push factors that really sort of like push the production go out of Japan or China. This is what happened in Asia, East Asia. At the same time, Indonesia has become a growing market now. So when I had I was in Tokyo about a month ago, I got a chance to see many CEOs of the large Japanese company who invest in Indonesia, and I asked, "You're concerning about the yendaka now, but this is not the first time the Japanese, are facing a problem of yendaka, because you had this yendaka back on the mid 80s, but it didn't translate it into a sort of like relocating the investment to Indonesia. Why it happens now?" And the answer is, now you do have the economies of scale. You do have the purchasing power. So sort of like combination of it really put Indonesia into the radar screen. Other countries are facing a lot of problems. Indonesia is growing. So we become, to be frank with you, the least unattractive country among the members in Asia. So this is really the push and, let me be honest with you, push and pull factor. But I know this could be temporary, because if other parts of the world become normal again, then Indonesia, then maybe some of the investors will think to look at other countries as well as the source of investment. And this is evident by our number of the foreign direct investment. January to June, I do have on the pipeline, the approval number is about 37 billion US dollar. This is the record high in the history. Our realization is about 12 billion US dollar during the first half of 2012. Last year, the foreign direct investment was about 19 billion US dollar for the whole year. This year, only during the first half, already 12 billion US dollar. So I'm thinking probably by the end of the year, we can reach about 24, 25 billion US dollars. So I'm not to worry so much about this, the situation this year. And the best indicator to look at this, whether this foreign investment will be realized in Indonesia or not, is the imported capital goods. Because the way people to sort of like to realize their investment is by starting to import machinery, raw materials, capital, etc. And usually the time lag between this importing capital goods turn out to be investment is about 3 to 6 months. So they imported machinery, and 3 months after that, they start to build a factory. So our number for the imported capital goods until July was about 32%. So we can be sure that 3 months or 6 months from now, the investment, the growth of the foreign direct investment will be more or less the same. So we are talking about this growth of the FDI is about 30%. The potential is really there. And the question is, where does this investment, go? The first one is, we do have this, what I call the 4 potentials. The first one is the young population, the demographic dividend. The average age for the productive worker in Indonesia is about 29 years old. So unlike in the US, we really enjoy this demographic bonus. It reminds me with the situation in Korea and Japan when they had the demographic bonus. Korea in the late 70s, in the 80s, and US was in the late 60s. They can grow by about 9 to 10% at a time. So the potential is really there. And this really changed the pattern of consumption in Indonesia. Let me tell you, we in Indonesia, we don't understand the concept of RSVP. Some people who become the ambassador, US ambassador to Jakarta understand clearly about it. Every time they send an invitation, ask them to do an RSVP, they never did. Why? Because every time we go to party or restaurant, the food is always there. You don't need to make a booking. But nowadays, if you come to the restaurant, even to fine dining, if you don't make a booking, you won't get a table. So this has really changed the behavior of the people because the growing middle class. In the past, 15 years ago, the only queue that you see is people would like to watch soccer or badminton or boxing. But now they queue in the shopping mall to buy an iPad, also the iPhone. This is really something typical of this, the middle class. Food used to be only a basic needs, but now people are sort of like looking for the restaurant for the fancy food to become the part of the lifestyle. So can you imagine that the wallet share of the SIM card is even higher than cigarette now? Because people would like to use this, have to access for the internet. And this is not only unique for Indonesia, this is typical a country with the growing. So the demand for these consumer products doing very well. Company like, who focus on the consumer products start to look at Indonesia again. Toyota, for example, they expand the production base. Daihatsu started the R&D in Indonesia now and started to export to Japan, 900 cars per month. So the potential is really there. So it is because the growing middle class. So let me talk a little bit about this composition of the middle class. There is a study done by the World Bank. In 2003, the percentage of people who spend at least $4 per day per capita was only 5%. If you're talking about $4 in Indonesia, will be considered as a middle class. Of course, not in the US, because our income per capita is about 3,500 US dollar. So $4 per day per capita was about 5%. By 2010, it jumped to become 18% within 7 years. The incremental bit from 5 to 18 was at that 13%, right? If you multiply by 240 million, you are talking about additional 40 million or 50 million. And this number, sort of like the incremental, is even larger than total population in Malaysia, Singapore, and Australia altogether. So people start to look at Indonesia because of it. The second one is natural resources, of course. If you look at on the what we call the Forbes of Asia, if you look at the top 20 Indonesian, the top richest Indonesia, most of them come from this coal producer, CPO, basically the natural resources. So Indonesia are endowed with this. So with the strong commodity prices and energy prices in the past, there are a lot of interest to look at Indonesia on this issue. The third one is, I should say that political situation is relatively stable. It's noisy, but not a threat. You know, people like to appear on TV to criticize the government every day, make you headache sometimes. But it's okay that the process of this, you know, sort of like transforming the democracy is already there. I think the path is quite clear because we are not experimenting again about this process of democracy. There is no way that Indonesia will back into this authoritarian regime. We've done with that. Last but not least, the macroeconomic stability. We've been very successful to manage the macroeconomic stability. Our debt to GDP is only less than 24% now. We could manage the budget deficit continue to less than 2%. When I was with the MOF, I was helping Sri Mulyani when she was a Minister of Finance. We ensured that the macroeconomic stability is really there. So this is really the sort of like the result of this good macroeconomic stability. But enough with the good story. Why? Because my concern is all the situations in the global economy could change at any time. I don't know, what's going to happen in Europe or in the US very soon. But let's say if there will be a sort of like recovery in other country and people start to review again their investment in Indonesia. So Indonesia cannot continue to become the least unattractive country, right? So it means that reform become very important. But let me lay out some of the problems. The first one is we want to achieve this, the McKinsey about 2 weeks ago came up with the report by saying that Indonesia will become the 7th largest economy in the world by 2030, 135 million consuming class, 110 million people with a spending $10 per day per capita. They are very optimistic. I do believe the potential is really there. But it needs to be supported by strong reform. But we still have facing a problem. The first one is related to the issue of this infrastructure. Yeah, let me be frank and honest with you. The cost of transporting from Makassar to Enrekang, which is in Sulawesi, it costs you double compared to 240 kilometers, costs you double compared to Hamburg to Warsaw, which is 250 kilometers. The reason why the Japanese put the investment production base in Thailand and not Jakarta is because they can taking the advantage of this FTA, but 0 to 5%, and the logistic cost from Bangkok to Sumatra or Jakarta is much cheaper than Jakarta to other parts in Sumatra. So the essence of modern business is really the supply chains, and that's the reason. So logistic, it's really the main issue. The second one, this country, cannot continue only to rely on natural resources. Somehow we have to move into this innovation, productivity-driven. But the human capital is also limited. If you're talking about the education level of attainment, we are lag behind compared to Philippines. The third one is related to the corruption. Let me share with you a very interesting story. When I was with the university, we conducted this research. When we launched the decentralization back on 2001, the share of this extra cost to the production cost. This is extra cost means anything that you have to pay besides the legal tax. It means bribe. Of course, when you ask your respondent, do you pay a bribe? The answer is no. But if they said, do you pay the extra cost? And 12% of the total production cost. But when we conducted the similar survey back in 2008, this share of this extra cost to the total production cost declined to become 8% related to the local government. And how do we explain this? It is very interesting that 7 years, 8 years after we launched the decentralization, the local government start to realize that it is very important to attract the investment come to their own region. So competition somehow reduce corruption. But unfortunately, if you look at the level of corruption at the national level, remain constant because I cannot introduce the competitor for tax office or custom. There is no competitor for the tax office and custom. So because of it, the impact is we can see is maybe one of the solution is by introducing competition among the local government. So I'll tell you later on about the things that we can do about it. Why this corruption matters now? During the Suharto, Indonesia was also a lot of corruptions there, but the economy still grew by about 8%. At the time, I think one of the reasons is because the issue of certainty. Because it came from this, the one gate corruption and then sort of like everything could be settled even until the lowest level. But now with the fragmentation of power, so you have to sort of like talk with the local government, central government, you have to bribe them in every sort of like in every post of it, so the transaction cost per bribe is increasing. So one thing that I learned from this, there is something worse than organized corruption, which is unorganized corruption. and this is the reality that we are facing it. So we need to deal with that. Okay? So now let me talk about, given all the situation, the potential is really there, and we still have got a problem, the issue of corruption, the issue of infrastructure. Then 4 months ago, the president called me. I was in the US, I was in Harvard at that time. He asked me to return to Jakarta to take this job. So the first thing I had in mind is, what should I do? In sort of like in terms of those to improve this investment situation in Asia. This is the thing that I would like to share with you. So I admitted that this problem is there, but let me share with you about my plan to sort of like so you can see that whether this is possible or not. The first one is a very simple one. My first day at the office is I started to think that it's not possible for the U.S. investor come to Indonesia only to check how to apply, how sort of like what is the application process for this doing the investment in Asia. The transaction cost will be very expensive if you just come to Jakarta and check how to apply. So in my mind, there are only three links in order to make it the investor come to Indonesia. The first one, they will check with the website, right? Whether the application process, everything is very clear. When I look at the website, I myself did not understand about what the information is provided in the website. So I thought that how can the investor could sort of like, using this kind of information? All the information is there, some of it in Bahasa Indonesia, and there is no clue whether this form is to be sort of like meant to be for the specific use for the permit or something. So I said that I need to improve this website. The second one, I thought that if they cannot get the information from the website, then probably they will call us through the telephone. So I checked my people at the investor relations unit. They didn't pick up the phone. So, and this is the reality. So the third one is I have to ensure they reply the email. But Indonesian, we don't reply email. So the first instruction comes from the chairman of the investment board. You have to pick up the phone. You have to reply email. And this kind of reform, you don't need a political compromise at the parliament. Right? You don't need to make a sort of like Abu Rizal Bakri sit together with, the chairman of the Partai Demokrat in order to allow people in my office to pick up the phone or to improve the website. So there are things that I can do it immediately in my office. So on the first day, I said that let's improve the website. I want to make sure all the everything. I would like to make sure there will be a sort of like investment for dummies. So everyone will understand no interpretation of it. You know, in Indonesia, money is not problem, but by creating problem, you earn money. If it's not transparent, then you need a consultant, right? And people become a consultant because the regulation is not clear. So one thing that I would like to have is I'll make it transparent for everything. That's the first objective, okay? So I said that if that's the case, then let's start with doing the reform with the small things. One thing that I learned when I was at the MOF, for the typical of reform, the dilemma of reform, the cost is immediate, but the benefit is always in the medium term. When I tried to convince the government to adjust the fuel price by 120% back on 2005, was not easy. It took us so long. And you know, after we did, even my wife got mad at me. So I stopped to read the Indonesian newspaper for 3 months because they always criticize us. But after several years, they start to look at, well, this decision was worth it. And President SBY was asked by President Obama to share his experience when adjusting the fuel price back in 2005. But it's only happened 5 years after that experience. So if you don't get the political support for your reform, then your reform will be truncated. So the first thing you need to do, you have to ensure that you gain the political credibility when you launch the reform. And you have to pick your own battles because you cannot go for the uphill battles immediately. So you have to start from your office. Get the particular battle that you can ensure that you will win. And I do believe for improving the website, picking up the phone, or sort of like, replying the email, I can do it. Yeah, I'm pretty sure about it. So once the people start to realize that there is something's changed in the office, then the trust is there. So you start to gain the credibility. So the next step, I went down to look at the front office. There was one lady. She was waiting for the queuing to be sort of like, to be processed for the investment application. It's already on the afternoon at 4 o'clock. Her queue number was 58, I still remember. But when I look at the queue on the digital, still number 30. So I came to ask her, what's your number? And she said that 58. So I said that probably you need to come again tomorrow. And she said, unfortunately, because I have to go to the tax office to the custom. And then she asked me, who are you? And I said that I'm chairman of this investment board. And she said that, why don't you do something in order to improve it? So immediately the next day, I asked my staff. And I said that, you guys, you have an experience by applying for the ID. You feel really bad if you have to wait for this kind for so long. So why we cannot improve the system? And they said that, here is the problem. People, the applicants, do not understand about what documents are needed. So they come to the counter by asking, is it the document? So there was a discussion between these applicants and then people at the counter. So every applicant took for about 45 minutes. It's like, go to the toll road and asking to the toll gatekeeper, where is the Washington, right? So there will be queue very long. So I said, if that's the case, then let's set up the help desk. So I set up the help desk. The job is very easy, just to check whether the document is really appropriate or not. And you go to the counter. And you know what happened? Within 1 day, we could reduce the queuing time for half days to only less than 2 hours. And I'll make sure that when you apply, is put it like the visa system. You can collect this document next Friday at 2 p.m. Similar. So that's already happened. And people start to, look at this. And I check in Twitter, because this is very important. You cannot check with your own stuff, because they're always telling all the good things about you. Everything is okay. You check with the Twitter. And they said there is an improvement already. I'm glad to hear that. Every week I check, because I know this is going back to the old situation again. So every time I'll check, what's really happening. And the third thing, that's what I'm doing now. I used to buy a book from the Amazon. Every time I book from the Amazon, they always provide me with the URL. I can do a tracking. So I can check the status of my book at any time. Where is the book already in Singapore, in the post office of Jakarta, and I can. So I was thinking, why don't we do it for the application process. If I could give the PIN to the investors, they could check it about the status of the application, right? This is the thing that I would like to launch, hopefully 2 weeks or 3 weeks from now. The system already there. The good thing about this is, I know the investors, they are professional complainers, right? So I have to channel their hobby by overseeing my staff at the office. Rather than establishing a team to overseeing, to sort of like to monitoring, I better ask the professional complainer, the investor, to take care about my staff. It means that when we provide a PIN, they know exactly the status of their application already on one table, move to another table. If they got stuck, they can come to us and said what happened to my application because already on that table for several days. Then I can do a checking. By doing this, we make it transparent. So the most important, the moral of the story is you create certainty. So the investor feels there is a friend in Indonesia who like to support them. So enough with that, So once we done with this, then I do believe that we'll gain a sort of like, we provide the evidence. So I also am very realistic because when I joined this, the investment board, my time is only, the cabinet will end by 2014. It's 2 more years to go. So I have to be very realistic. People talk about the issue of this, improvement of this governance, infrastructure, everything, which is very good. But I need to provide a success story. I think the most important, one thing missing in Indonesia is we fail to provide a success story. We become very successful to become a sort of like, instead of coming with the master plan, we become the plan master. So we have to provide a success story. And this is very important because otherwise your policy will be eroded because people will not trust you if we're just talking about this is what I'm going to do. So it means that I need to focus only the few cases. Why I need to focus on the few cases? Because if I focus on it, I can deploy all my resources to take care of it. So focus on the few target, settle down, move to the next target. At least people can see that doing business in Indonesia is possible. Why this kind of strategy would be very successful? Because I can take care of sort of like a particular investor. If they got a problem with the line ministries, we can talk to the line ministries. We can deploy the team to talk to the Minister of Finance, for example. I myself can talk to the Minister of Finance. If they got a problem with the local government, I myself can talk to the governor. But I cannot do it for the whole investors. Of course, the question is the kind of picking winner. And we had a very bad experience with the picking winner because government is very bad in picking winners, but losers are very good in picking government. But somehow, this is a trade-off, right? I have to make a decision of it. Otherwise, if we don't provide the evidence of it, then it will be very difficult. So that is why now I'm focusing on what I call, if this investment is a huge amount of investment, creating jobs strategic in terms of this climate change, we will sort of like putting as the success story. And we already have, for example, like POSCO Steel from Korea, $5 to $6 billion US. We are taking care, we sort of like talk to the local government to ensure they got land. We talk to the Minister of Finance because they are eligible for the tax holiday. By doing it, you cater the investors, then you can settle the problem. Now we are working, of course, I don't want to sort of like making a progress, but we are working on Foxconn, for example. Yeah, so the strategic one, because this is very important, this is very iconic. We are talking about company like Toyota for the expansion. Some of it, when people start to realize that doing business in Indonesia is possible. If we start to look at this, focus on the success story, then it means that I have to change the way we do the promotion. Because usually come to do a promotion is always like to have this, like the business luncheon like this. And this is good for the embassy as well, because the performances will be looked at whether been successful to arrange a discussion in the country. But the most important part for me is to have this one-on-one meeting. So we do the strategic, the intelligence, the market intelligence. We already identify about the potential investors. So when we come, we sort of like, come to the issues. Let's say they come, they already have 10 problems there. If I can solve it 5, then I brought it back home another 5, and I said, please contact us after this, we follow up. So we can sort of like, try to handle this issue. So this is the way we change this the promotion strategy. And the last but not least, how do we talk with the line ministries? Because this is very important. And I know some of you probably concerned about the issue of this. Let me give an example about this natural resources policy from the Ministry of Mining and Energy. The issue of smelter. Because the Ministry of Mining and Energy issued the decree by saying that if you want to invest in smelter, then within 10 years you are required to divest for the 51%. I do understand about the objective of this policy, because Indonesia cannot continue to rely only on natural resources, because these natural resources somehow depleted. We have to move into this productivity and innovation, but it doesn't mean that we neglect the timing and also the stages of this economic development. Let me give an example. There is no way Indonesia can compete with Bangladesh in producing garment, because their wages is only 1/5 of us. But Indonesia can still continue to be in the garment business if we produce batik. So it means that there is a role of innovation there with the design. So still in the same product, but sort of like we find a niche market of it. We can continue in the natural resources, but it means the role of value added become very important. But if you try to impose this policy immediately, then maybe this will hurt some investors. For example, like in the case of smelter, 3 billion investment. If you are required to divest within 10 years, then nobody would like to do it, to invest in Indonesia. And I do understand that I cannot come to the Minister of Mining and Energy and said that, why don't we sort of like annul this policy? No way. So you have to find a way. So my strategy, I spoke to him, look, this is not possible. This is very difficult. Why don't we talk about to find a solution? What about if we talk about the time frame? If we cannot solve it within 10 years, then probably we need to look at, 20, 25 years until enough return for them before they are required to divest. And by doing this, you don't annul, this is sort of like a the saving phase policy. You don't annul the regulation, but at the same time, you ensure that the investors, will get a benefit of it. So by doing this kind of solution, I do believe that there is a room for us to improve the situation in Indonesia. So I said that, before my conclusion, one thing that I can promise to you, if you want to invest in Indonesia, you're going to see a lot of problems. But the investment board is stand ready to help you, because we want to ensure all the process become very smooth. It's not going to be easy. So we try to sort of like to help you to talk with the local government, with the other line ministries. So the last part is, how do we handle with the local government? Because sometimes, we cannot really handle them in a proper way. So my strategy is, I always ask them now during my promotion trip. I deliver a keynote speech, they become a main presenter. My objective is, I want to ensure the ownership is there. And so they feel the ownership. They always said that I don't need the investment, I just need your statistic. So if they feel the ownership, they have the ownership, then, they will be responsible, accountable for that one. So we have to change this promotion. So the moral of the story is actually, reform is doable, but we have to do what I call the double track of reform. Of course, the ideal one would be the so-called, the perfect World Bank recommendation, which requires the good governance. And I could say that this could only be implemented 25 years from now, because corruption will continue to be there, the uncertainty of legal system continue to be there. But the short term is, given at the constraint or the uncertain legal system, the corruption, what kind of policies still work? We cannot change the constraint immediately, but it doesn't mean that we are not living in the first best world. We are living in the second best world, running by the third best bureaucracy. So what will be the sort of like the real solution of it? So I always become very pragmatic. So given the constraint, what kind of policy can still work? So I said that this is probably very sad. If we cannot to provide the good governance, we probably need good enough governance, just to ensure that at least in the short term, that this policy could be implemented. Otherwise, if we can provide enough evidence, then people start to believe that doing business in Indonesia is possible. I think I'll stop it here, Ronnie. Thank you very much.
I'll just invite the chairman to answer questions standing up so you can see him. This is on the record, so is that okay?
Sure.
So please just indicate your name and your affiliation, and we'll open the floor. Ted, I saw your hand first.
Ted Osius from CSIS and the State Department. Thank you for a pragmatic and honest presentation. You mentioned infrastructure and the limitations on Indonesia's infrastructure. It seems that Japan, Korea, China have been moving fast in investing in Indonesia's infrastructure. But I noticed that this summer, the embassy posted a report on infrastructure investment opportunities outside of the capital, in the second-tier cities like Semarang, Palembang, and then this week you announced 8 new infrastructure projects to be awarded to U.S. companies in Palembang, Semarang, in the second-tier cities. Is the log jam broken?
Okay, let me be frank with this. Yes, we got a problem of this, infrastructure issue. The logistic cost is very expensive. It's about 14% of the total production cost. If you compare to Japan, it's only 5%. But one of the problem about all this project of infrastructure, the project preparation is not perfect. So the projects are not really ready to be offered. So it's like inviting investor come to the country, but we abandon it at the airport. So what I need to do is sort of like to ensure again, just focus on the, few case study, a success story to ensure that this project is okay. The main issue is, of course, the classic land clearing. The good news is the government, well, for you who are not really sort of like familiar with Indonesia, we didn't have the eminent domain law in Indonesia. So if there is one single family to refuse to surrender their land, then we cannot build a road. But now the bill has been passed by the parliament. The president already issued the decree. The good news is if you have a dispute of the land price, this could be resolved through the court within 90 days. So there is a time limit of it. If you disagree, then you can appeal another 18 days. So overall, it's about 108 days. But unfortunately, this only applies for the new project. So for the existing projects, which is some of the problem, really the major problems, there is a transition period for about maybe 500 days. It is, to be honest with you, this is still too long. Yeah, so people have to wait probably until 2014 but beyond 2014, everything will be settled. So related to the new projects of this this is the project that we think that is ready to offer. So rather than, if you look at the MP3EI, there are maybe 100 of projects, about ports, about everything that ready to offer, but better focus. This is the thing that I talked to them. It's better focus on the few projects that you ensure that the project preparation is already prepared. But, as I said again, land clearing is still a problem. But if you start with a new project, I do believe that, they somehow, the new presidential decree will help. I do hope I answer your question, Ted.
Dana Marshall with Transnational Strategy Group and American University, and we echo Ted's comments. It's a very refreshing, candid, pragmatic presentation, really one of the best, so thank you for that. With Ernie's permission, I really had a couple of points for you. One is you had mentioned, and maybe this is answering my own question, the effect of a successful, let me qualify, a Trans-Pacific Partnership negotiation. What does it mean if Vietnam, Malaysia, others get access here and Indonesia may not? The other is you mentioned, and you've